Right, so if anything truly deserves to finish Keir Starmer off as the red Tory footnote in political history that he is, it is his ardent support for making the cost of living crisis worse for all of us. But to turn his sights on disabled people whose health issues are so severe they can never work specifically, and may never have been able to work, is unforgivable and inexcusable cruelty. It must be stated that we are, of course, still awaiting the full details of what is actually to come. But when government berks can go on telly and refuse to rule out benefit freezes or even cuts for the most severe cases, everyone has every reason to worry. There is certainly misinformation out there. Personal independence payments are not getting axed, for example. But facing a freeze, it is still a real terms cut to everyone who has managed to claim it through all of the hurdles already put in place before people who tried to claim it. Benefit cuts, winter fuel allowance cuts, energy bill rises, water bill rises, council tax rises, wages too low. It is those at the bottom end of the income scale, including those in work and indeed disabled people in work, who are going to be hit hardest here. All as we watch Starmer and Reeves spend more on defence and give away billions to Ukraine. And although a rebellion of Labour MPs is mooted, with 404 Labour MPs, what difference will even 80 rebels make? And will they be punished for standing up for what is right and fair, as we've seen others suffer under? This deserves to finish Starmer and this evil government. And if Labour MPs can't stop this, then we have to at the ballot box at the next opportunity. Right, so the Labour Party, once upon a time positioning itself as the party of social justice, of equality and compassion. It still does that under Keir Starmer, except we know that under him it is a lie, like everything is. And it stands for nothing of the sort. Not when the rich and Starmer's mates and donors avoid paying their fair share. Even to the point the most severely disabled now face real terms cuts to their incomes to make up for giving billions to Zelensky. And even if you consider that an unfair comparison, the optics are what they are. Starmer and Reeves can give away billions, and now the cuts come after, seemingly to pay for that. Social security reforms, benefits, welfare, called all sorts, depending on the narrative a chosen media outlet wants to present, particularly the recent reports of a planned freeze on personal independence payments, or PIP, have cast a shadow of pure nastiness even further, raising serious concerns about the party's commitment to protecting the most vulnerable in society, i.e. they don't give a fig. PIP is a lifeline for millions of disabled people across the UK. It provides essential financial support to those who face significant challenges in their daily lives due to disability or illness. It helps address these additional costs because, of course, there are going to be additional costs. Any idiot should be able to comprehend that and give them a semblance of dignity and respect in their lives. From paying for transport to helping them access and get to work to paying for essential services they cannot manage themselves. A freeze on PIP, which would amount to a real terms cut in the face of rising inflation, as we know, we should all know how that works by now. We've all been made poor enough for enough years by now to understand that. It would disproportionately affect the most severely disabled individuals, those who clearly and obviously cannot work. If implemented, this freeze risks driving thousands of disabled people into poverty, undermining the very principles of fairness and social justice that Labour supposedly stands for. What Labour was supposedly built on. But Labour doesn't stand for that anymore, does it? They've told us as much, haven't they? Labour is the party of work. Clue is in the name, we're told by these snobby sods in ties. Wrong. It is the party of workers, not work. Always has been, always will be. Clue is in the name. To be the party of work puts you on the side of the bosses, not the employees. And actually, even that isn't the whole truth. Because Labour was set up to represent the working class, be they in work or not, for whatever reason. But we're a long way from Keir Hardy with Keir Starmer, aren't we? His Labour Party is just another lousy Tory party of the rich now. Of that there is little need for debate. As you can imagine, though, the proposed freeze has sparked outrage amongst disability rights groups, activists, and even within the Labour Party itself. Reports suggest that up to 80 Labour MPs are prepared to rebel against the government's welfare reforms. I'll believe it when I see it. But it does highlight the depth of discontent that's being spoken about within the party. But even this doesn't go far enough. If 80 MPs are preparing to rebel over this, that means 324 of them are still likely to vote for whatever the actual details are when they come, cuts or freezes certainly, whatever they turn out to be. It's not much of a rebellion in the grand scheme of things, therefore, despite being a big number that's large enough to attract the mainstream media. It's unlikely to be enough to stop the reforms from passing, no matter what they look like, as the majority of Labour MPs are just going to do as they always do, toe the party line, fearing the consequences of defying this rabid right-wing Labour leadership. Memories, of course, will be cast back to those 7 MPs who got the whip withdrawn for rebelling over the 2-child benefit cap, punished for daring to vote against impoverishing kids. How dare they? So would Starmer end up suspending 80? He could afford to, in theory. But given the publicity damage last time over those 7, I'd suggest this is probably less likely. So come on, Labour MPs, show some backbone instead of behaving like a shiver looking for a spine. And while the full details of these social security reforms have not yet been published, reports suggest that they include measures to tighten eligibility criteria, reduce the overall welfare budget, and shift the focus towards supporting people into work. On the surface, these reforms may appear to be aimed at creating a more efficient and sustainable welfare system. However, a closer examination reveals that they risk causing significant harm to some of the most vulnerable members of society, because no allowance appears to be being made clear for those who clearly cannot work, do not still be made worse off. For disabled people who are unable to work due to the severity of their conditions, PIP is not a luxury, it is an absolute necessity. It helps cover the additional costs associated with living with a disability. I mentioned some uses for it a moment ago. Some others would include mobility aids, home adaptations, and personal care. The list is endless, actually. None of it is cheap. A freeze on PIP, a real terms cut, will simply end up leaving recipients increasingly unable to meet their basic needs. The most vulnerable people unable to meet their basic needs. And when you consider there are already high levels of poverty among disabled people in the UK, rather than cut this money, it should be being raised. According to the Disability Benefits Consortium, around 4.4 million disabled people live in poverty in this country, and cuts to PIP would only exacerbate that crisis, plunging an additional 700,000 disabled people into poverty. That's not rebuilding the country, that's not fixing a broken system, that's just evil. Willful, unnecessary, and unrepentant evil. So does Labour deserve some backlash already, even though the details are not yet fully confirmed? Well, yes, of course they do. Against the backdrop of the ministerial responses we've seen, the reports that have come out, this is absolutely justified and necessary, because it shows the anger in the country at this, that we don't agree with this, that we didn't vote for this, and we won't stand for it, and we'll give you a bloody nose at the ballot box to prove it if needs be. Of all the people in the country to strip money from, in effect, you've got to be pretty depraved to consider the most severely disabled people amongst us as a fair target. However, the rebellion is unlikely to be enough to stop the reforms from passing. The Labour Party's strict disciplinary mechanisms, of which we're fully aware, include the threat of withdrawing the whip, have created a culture of fear and conformity amongst MPs. They cannot think for themselves, they're not allowed to have original thoughts. They're there to do as they're told and vote as they're told. The recent example of the 7 MPs who lost the whip for voting to scrap the 2-child benefit cap demonstrates the consequences of defying this leadership. They're rancid. And while these MPs may have acted on principle, their punishment sends a clear message to others. Dissent will not be tolerated. Speaking of depraved, though, not all Labour MPs are opposed to these welfare reforms, even if it does mean stripping money from severely disabled people. A group of MPs have formed the Get Britain Working Group, who have issued a statement, the latter part of which reads, "As MPs, we understand that delivering this new social contract requires hard choices to be made. We welcome the work that has begun to rebuild our welfare system, and we are fully supportive of it. We believe reforming our broken system is not only necessary, but also a truly progressive endeavour. And so we have established the Get Britain Working Group to make that argument insistently. We have the opportunity to create a transformed welfare system, one built on employment that refuses to accept wasted potential as inevitable. A system which measures its compassion by the opportunity it provides, not the lowness of its expectation. As a group, we are ready to do all we can to support you in building it." I'm sorry, I'm not having that. It's not a hard choice to punch down on the most disabled people of all. It's the easiest, it's the most craven, it's the most lousy. What an easy target they are, and those defending it here are craven, clueless monsters. You aren't fixing a broken system, you're taking a sledgehammer to it to cripple it even further. And those whose lives literally rely on it. And as much as you want to talk about getting Britain working, you make no allowance at all for those who so obviously can't. The guy whose name is at the top of this letter is Labour MP for Hendon, David Pinto-Dushinsky, who also happens to be chair of the DWP Select Committee. So the chair of the committee that holds the DWP to account, or is supposed to, cheerleading for these so-called welfare reforms. 36 Labour MPs have signed up to this group. Others worth a mention are Luke Akehurst, who is himself disabled, walks around with a stick, and whose work background mainly consists of cheerleading for Israel, as well as having stitched up the NEC together with another signatory, Gurinder Singh Josen. Slum landlord Jazz Athwell is on that list, as well as fellow nasty landlord Bayo Alaba and the Corbyn obsessive Joni Reid. Here's an image of the list. See if your MP is on there. Perhaps ask them what they think they're doing, if they are. The Get Britain Working Group's stance reflects that ever more right-wing ideological shift within the Labour Party that means it is no longer a Labour Party, away from its traditional commitments to social justice, becoming just as bad, if not worse potentially, than the Tories before them. There's certainly no change here, as they stood on the election campaign for. For many, PIP is the difference between being able to live independently and being forced into poverty and becoming trapped in your home 24/7. The difficulty of claiming PIP, with roughly half of all claims being denied, adds to the challenges faced by disabled people, whilst undermining nonsense, ill-informed narratives that loads of people claim it, that it is easy to claim and it is riddled with fraudsters. Over a one-year period, according to the DWP's own figures, around 333,000 PIP claims were denied. The appeals process is lengthy, it is stressful, and many people give up entirely before they are able to secure the payments they may well be entitled to. The claim that benefit fraud is a significant problem is often used to justify cuts to welfare by these same people and the lowest form of political pond life out there, because this claim is a myth, especially when measured against much, much bigger issues like tax evasion and tax fraud. And this is especially true when it comes to PIP, undermining any suggestion of freezing it or cutting it, because the level of fraud in PIP is 0%, meaning that it simply does not exist. And despite this, the government continues to use rhetoric like cracking down on fraud to justify its welfare reforms, even applying to PIP, as we're now seeing being mooted, perpetuating harmful stereotypes about disabled people, painting a target on their backs and diverting attention away from the real issues, where the real cuts can and should be made, or where tax rises instead would be more appropriate, like on the rich maybe. Well, despite the gaping chasms of ableist idiots on social media who always seem to get themselves amplified on matters like this, the wider public is likely to view cuts to disability benefits, especially the most disabled, as deeply unfair, plain nasty, cruel, evil, particularly at a time when the government is still managing to find billions of pounds to increase defence spending or provide aid to Ukraine. And this perception of unfairness will erode public trust in the government and damage Labour's electoral prospects and serve them right, with the thug Mike Amesbury now triggering a by-election by stepping down as an MP after that late-night punch-up of his. A strong message could be sent out, Labour holding a roughly 15,000 vote majority there. But equally, with local elections coming up in May, at least where Starmer hasn't managed to stop them, afraid of elections as he now is, we can give him a good reason to be afraid, can't we? Because politicians behaving like this, pushing policies like this, they should be afraid of us and where we take our vote in future. The fact that the full details of Labour's welfare reforms have not yet been published does not mean that it is too early to talk about them, or that we shouldn't be bothering, or that it is pointless conjecture to. Enough is known for there to be real concerns. Therefore, now is the perfect time to raise awareness of the potential impact of these reforms and to put pressure on the government that if this is what they're thinking, they can think again, and that they can still have time to change course, especially when it comes to those most severely disabled people, because there can be no forgiveness if they still end up being targeted for cuts. It is also important to challenge the disinformation that is circulating about PIP as well. Contrary to what a lot of fear-mongering fools are saying, PIP is not being axed. However, a freeze on PIP, a real terms cut as that would be, would still have a devastating impact on disabled people, and it is essential that this is understood and communicated clearly. The Labour Party's strict disciplinary mechanisms, combined with that ideological shift rightwards, have created a Labour government as bad as, if not worse than some Tory governments we've had, and we should treat them just the same. Any cuts to PIP in real terms will be an act of pure evil. Rising with inflation is the minimum required. There are already too many disabled people in poverty. It shouldn't be more than that. Of course, anything Starmer will have done so far, if this comes to pass, it'll be his most evil deed to date. And with 4 years and change still to go before we can vote Labour out of power, you genuinely fear how far he's going to go next. We can't see the back of this nastiest of politicians fast enough. And just to underline that nastiness a little bit more, it turns out as these welfare reforms are pushed ahead with, it was mere months ago that Rachel Reeves was lobbied by BlackRock to back off clamping down on non-dom tax avoidance. You can't help but wonder if the PIP cuts are happening to keep tax evaders happy, therefore. Get all the details of that story in this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe so as to ensure you don't miss out on all new daily content, as well as helping to support the channel, which is very much appreciated, holding power to account for ordinary working class people, and I will hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers folks.